There's an old saying in America, crime doesn't pay. That is a lie. Crime pays beautifully. The problem isn't making the money, the problem is keeping it. Imagine you have $10 million cash in 1930. That is not a number on a banking app. That is a physical problem. It is tons of paper, dirty, crumpled paper smelling of sweat and gunpowder. If you buy a house, the IRS asks, "Where did you get this?" If you put it in a bank, the bank calls the police. If you hide it under a mattress, the rats eat it or your rivals steal it. Money you cannot spend is not wealth. It is evidence. It is a death sentence printed on green paper. Al Capone never understood this. He was the king of Chicago. Yet he ended his life rotting from syphilis in a prison cell, caught on a banal tax evasion charge. He was the muscle. But there was another man, a man who never held a Thompson submachine gun. He had a far more dangerous weapon, a calculator. He died in his own bed, an old man, leaving behind a legacy of $300 million that the FBI never found. He wasn't just a criminal. He was the father of the modern offshore economy, the man who taught the world that money has no smell if you wash it correctly. This is the story of Meyer Lansky. To understand the system, you must understand the architect. Meyer Lansky, a Polish Jew, arrived in New York with empty pockets and a mind full of numbers. While Italian kids like Lucky Luciano learned to break bones, Lansky learned to break the odds. He was a mathematical genius. He saw the world not as a set of moral rules, but as an equation. In the Prohibition era, the mob was drowning in cash. It was a golden reign. Bootlegging brought in profits that no legal industry could match. Gangsters bought silk suits, gold watches, and stacked piles of cash in damp basements where it literally rotted. But Lansky saw what the others missed. He saw that Prohibition was temporary. Eventually, the party would end. And then what? When Capone went to prison in 1931, it was a shock. For the first time, the system showed it didn't care about the bodies, but it cared deeply about the dollars that bypassed Uncle Sam. Lansky told his partners a phrase that changed the underworld forever. "We are bigger than U.S. Steel. We are a corporation, and we must act like one." He realized that violence is bad for business. Violence attracts attention. Business needs silence. And most importantly, business needs clean legal assets. He needed to turn bloody bootlegging cash into respectable capital. He needed alchemy. But how do you turn lead into gold in a country where every dollar is under the microscope of the IRS? Lansky's gaze turned across the ocean to a small, neutral country known for chocolate, watches, and absolute silence. 1934. While America struggled through the Great Depression, Switzerland passed a law that became the holy grail for criminals worldwide, the Swiss Banking Act of 1934, Article 47. It made disclosing client information a criminal offense. If a banker revealed whose money was in an account, he went to prison. For Lansky, this was a revelation. He didn't just find a bank, he found a black box, a place where money loses its owner's name and becomes just a number. Here is how the scheme worked. It was genius in its simplicity and audacity. I call it the loan back. Step 1, export. You have $1 million of dirty cash in New York. You can't deposit it at Chase Manhattan. So Lansky hired couriers, mules, tourists, businessmen, flight attendants, suitcases with false bottoms. The money was physically smuggled out of the U.S. to Canada, then wired to Europe or flown directly to Geneva. Step 2, the wash. The money lands in a Swiss bank. It goes into a numbered account. No names, only a code. Now, this money officially exists in the Swiss legal system, but to the U.S., it is invisible. Step 3, the return. And here's Lansky's magic. He sets up a legal company in the U.S., a construction firm or a hotel chain. This company has no money. It is poor. Lansky, through shell companies and proxies, applies to that same Swiss bank for a loan. The bank says, "Certainly, we will lend you $1 million. Whose money is it? It is your money. You're borrowing your own dirty cash back from yourself. The money returns to the U.S. absolutely legally. It is no longer income from narcotics or racketeering. It is foreign investment or a bank loan. With this money, Lansky built casinos, hotels, and restaurants. But it gets better. When you pay back a loan, you pay interest. In the U.S., business loan interest is tax deductible. So Lansky wasn't just laundering money. He was forcing the IRS to subsidize his operations. He was effectively paying interest to himself, into his offshore account, and getting a tax break in America for doing it. It was checkmate. Lansky turned the Mafia from a gang of thugs into an international hedge fund. While the FBI looked for marked bills, Lansky operated with cashier's checks stamped by the most respected financial institutions in Europe. But for this machine to run at full power, Lansky needed his own territory. A place where gambling was legal and the cash flow was infinite. He needed the desert. Las Vegas wasn't created by businessmen in suits. It was created by gangsters who needed a hub for the loan back scheme. Bugsy Siegel built the Flamingo, But Meyer Lansky financed it. Where did the millions for construction come from? Swiss loans. A casino is the perfect washing machine. Imagine a player at a table. He loses $1,000. That is pure profit. But who checks how many players were actually there? Lansky perfected the concept of skimming. Every night, before the counters tallied the revenue, the cream was skimmed off the top. Suitcases of cash flew back to Switzerland, only to return as new loans to build the next hotel. The circle closed. Money made money, and the air of Vegas was thick with the scent of legalized sin. Lansky created a perpetual motion machine of corruption. And the scariest part? Everyone saw the hotels. Everyone saw the shows. Everyone saw the smiles. But no one saw the foundation. Because the foundation wasn't made of concrete. It was made of lies. And uncovering those lies is exactly why this channel exists. Most people prefer the comforting illusion, but if you want to see the machinery behind the history, hit subscribe. We are just scratching the surface of the archives they don't want you to read. If Las Vegas was Lansky's sandbox, Cuba became his kingdom. In America, Lansky had to hide. The FBI was breathing down his neck. But in Cuba, Meyer Lansky wasn't a gangster. He was an investor, an honored guest. He effectively owned the government. Fulgencio Batista, the dictator of Cuba, was the ideal partner. He was greedy, he loved power, and he understood nothing about running casinos. The deal was simple. Lansky brings the money and the tourists. Batista gets envelopes of cash and ensures stability. Lansky turned Havana into the Latin Las Vegas. But it was an illusion. Tourists saw palm trees and heard jazz. Lansky saw only the flow. Hotels like the Riviera, the Capri, the Nacional, these weren't just hotels. They were pumps. They sucked dollars out of American tourists and pumped them through a complex web of offshores straight into accounts in Zurich and the Bahamas. In the 1950s, Cuba generated more money for the mob than all their U.S. operations combined. It was the apex of Lansky's financial know-how. He created a state within a state. No taxes, no audits, no FBI. He thought he had built an empire that would last forever. He thought he had bought the country, but he forgot one variable in his equation. Lansky calculated for corrupt politicians, greedy bankers, and addicted gamblers. But his equation didn't have a variable for bearded men coming down from the Sierra Maestra Mountains. In economics, there's a concept called a black swan, an event impossible to predict, but one that changes everything. For Meyer Lansky, that black swan was Fidel Castro. Lansky, the genius of calculation, made a fatal error. He bet on a dictator hated by his own people. When the rebels entered Havana on New Year's Eve, 1958, they didn't play roulette. They smashed slot machines with rifle butts. To the revolutionaries, the casinos were symbols of American imperialism and corruption. In that single night, Meyer Lansky lost not just his casinos, he lost $7 million of personal investment and hundreds of millions in potential profit. His dream of a mafia state collapsed in 24 hours. He fled the island, barely escaping with his life. Batista flew out with suitcases of money. Lansky flew out with a stomach ulcer and a shattered empire. Castro nationalized everything. Hotels, casinos, accounts. The mathematician collided with a force that didn't obey the logic of profit. Ideology defeated economics, at least for a moment. After Cuba, Lansky's world began to shrink. The FBI, humiliated by decades of failure, decided to destroy him at any cost. They couldn't prove the murders. They couldn't prove the rackets. So they went the way of Al Capone. Taxes. In 1970, Lansky made a desperate move. He flew to Israel. Under the law of return, every Jew has the right to citizenship. Lansky thought he had found the ultimate sanctuary, a place with no extradition. But Prime Minister Golda Meir faced a dilemma: accept Lansky and turn Israel into a haven for American gangsters, ruining relations with the U.S., their main arms supplier, or refuse him and violate the principle of sanctuary for all Jews. Lansky's money, which opened every door in Havana and Vegas, was powerless here. Israel rejected him. He was deported. It was a blow worse than prison. His own people had rejected him. He returned to the U.S., expecting arrest. But fate played one last joke. At his trial, his lawyers dismantled the prosecution's case. The key witness was unreliable. Lansky, a sick old man, walked free again. The final years of the mob's accountant were strange. Officially, he was almost bankrupt. His net worth was estimated at a pathetic tens of thousands of dollars. He lived in a modest apartment in Miami Beach. His wife complained about grocery prices. Journalists would ask, "Meyer, where's the money? Where are the $300 million the FBI talks about?" Lansky would just smile that thin, reptilian smile and say, "I'm just a pensioner." Many believe he lost it all in Cuba. Others think his partners robbed him when he became too old and weak. But there is a third theory. Lansky hid the money so deep that even after his death, no one could find the keys. In 1983, Meyer Lansky died of lung cancer. He He left his family an official inheritance of about $57,000. The FBI spent millions hunting his fortune. They never found a single cent of the offshore accounts. The accountant took the password to his grave. Or maybe the password had already been passed on. Lansky died, but his invention survived. In fact, it mutated. What Lansky did in smoke-filled backrooms with gangsters today is done by men in Brioni suits in the skyscrapers of Manhattan and London. Lansky was the beta tester. Today's global economy is version 2.0. You might ask, why should I care about a dead gangster from the 1930s? I don't gamble, I don't run rum. You should care, because you live in the house Lansky built. Look at your paycheck. See the tax line? It's deducted automatically. You cannot hide from it. You're a captive of the system. Now look at the empty skyscrapers in London or New York, penthouses worth $50 million where no one lives. Why are they empty? Because they aren't housing. They are safe deposit boxes. Meyer Lansky taught the world that real estate is the best way to store stolen wealth. Today, your housing prices are inflated because the global elite uses the real estate market as a giant laundromat. Oligarchs, corrupt officials, cartels, they all use Lansky's methods. Shell companies, offshores, proxies. You aren't competing for a home against another family. You're competing against anonymous capital that just needs a place to hibernate. Lansky didn't just steal money. He stole fairness. He created a world where taxes are paid only by the poor and the honest. When the Panama Papers leaked in 2016, the world was shocked. Billions of dollars hidden by politicians, kings, and celebrities. Everyone screamed, "Scandal!" I laughed. Because there was nothing new in those documents. These were the exact same schemes Lansky doodled on napkins in 1934. Only the names changed. What Lansky called the loan back, Apple and Google call the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. What Lansky called skimming, banks call transaction fees. What Lansky did with suitcases of cash is done today with cryptocurrency in milliseconds. Lansky dreamed that the Mafia would become like U.S. Steel. The reality was far more terrifying. U.S. Steel, the banks, and the corporations became like the Mafia. The line blurred. The financial system doesn't fight money laundering. It depends on it. If you removed all the gray money from the global economy tomorrow, the system would collapse. Meyer Lansky was a small man, 5'4". He never raised his voice. He loved reading history books. He was the only one of the old guard who didn't end his life in a pool of blood on the sidewalk. Why? Because he understood the great secret of capitalism before anyone else. Money is water. If you build the right canals, the water flows where you want it. And it doesn't matter how dirty the water is. As long as it flows, it turns the turbines. We look for villains with guns. But the real villains are armed with legal contracts and banking algorithms. Meyer Lansky died in 1983. But every time you hear about an offshore account, a tax haven, or an anonymous transfer, know this. It is the ghost of the old boy from Grodno sending you his regards. He won. The casino always wins. History isn't what is written in textbooks. It's what is hidden in ledgers. If you want to understand how the world really works, stop listening to politicians. Start following the money. History has the answers.